take questions for Rob now, as he's going to have to dash away. Does anyone have anything they want to ask Rob before we go back to Simon? So.
Rob, hello. Thanks for dashing along. There are two big questions here, aren't there? One of them is the question of Google going to people's open Wi-Fi accounts and taking personal files and so on, which I think undoubtedly is invasive. Yes. But the other, the idea of driving down the street and taking photographs, is there an invasion in privacy involved in taking photos of something that's public? I'm not sure there is.
Well, there is an argument to say that anyone can walk down any street and take pictures. Well, in fact, before the Prevention of Terrorism Act, that is. Because now people get arrested for taking pictures of trains and so on, which is disgraceful. But nevertheless, I do think it's an infringement on liberty because nobody has the capacity to do that unless you're a big multinational company like Google, which can go around photographing people's gardens. Now, I think, okay, you have the paparazzi on, but those are very micro cases. And Google is actually doing it on every street in Britain, and yet without people's permission. And you've seen where it goes. You know, where do you stop? You know, what permission have they asked from? You know, who have they paid? If someone wants to take a picture of my garden, no problem, but people should have a right to charge for it. People should be asked their permission. This is the problem. Google is going around doing what it wants without asking anyone. And that is, you know, the biggest reservation I have. Please.
I confess, I don't know too much about this debate. I'm here to learn about it. You said that there was a picture of a child taken that was then removed by Google. Could I call Google up and say, you've got a picture of my house, I want that removing?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can do it on the site.
Yeah, but exactly that's the problem. They should ask your permission before they put your address on.
But I have that redress.
Okay. So go in front.
Well, I feel a conflict here. I, like probably many people in this room, feel angry when we're told that, you know, police officers and pseudo-police officers dump on people who are photographing the housing department. Well, if you believe that, I don't believe you can adopt your position. If you have a naked child on the street, or you can be seen from a public street, then if it's photographed, well, you really think twice when you put it there. If your house is photographed, I don't believe you have any particular right to stop anybody. In Africa, Marseille charges a shilling for photographing them. We believe that to be absurd. Why should we go to that situation?
I'm not saying they shouldn't go to one, I'm saying people should be asked for their permission.
To photograph your house?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
and it's not just your house, it's your garden, it's your car.
That seems to be that's madness on that.
It's a public space. I think Google has a reasonable defence.
But it
is a public space, and they're standing in the street looking at something that any individual can go and look at and taking a picture of it. That's never been illegal.
So there's a difference between public space where you photograph a street and somebody's private garden.
Something visible from the street, which is a public space.
Somebody's private garden to me, an Englishman's home is his castle, and somebody's private garden is their private garden. And people should not have the right to take a photograph of it unless I give their permission. As I happen, I would give Google permission. I'd love to have my house on there. Seriously, this is the thing. This is, you know, what I'm saying is Google are doing all this. They're asking people.
When Barbara Streisand made that argument, she was widely laughed at.
Well, what can I say?
Let's go one at a time. Do indicate if you want to ask a question. Society must have rules, otherwise. There was a gentleman.
Yeah, just to take an example of photographing, my local newspaper up in Suffolk, for example, will often produce, as part of a colour supplement over a weekend, you'll have air shots of certain towns and coast areas. And you can actually really see quite detailed photographs of people's homes. Now, if they were taken out of an aircraft, and I very much doubt, unless something's very radically changed, that the people who took those photographs individually asked permission of everybody over whose homes they flew over as to whether they could take those pictures. And for that matter, to take a more extreme example, you know, an Air Force jet was on an air reconnaissance mission and is photographing things on the ground, they're hardly likely to say, by the way, do you very much mind that this NATO aircraft does what it's doing? So clearly there has to be, what I'm not quite clear about is to what extent, as to how far you have to go before you suddenly have to say, excuse me, do you mind if I photograph your property? Okay. Because clearly it's happened for a long time, not just since Google, it's happened since photography existed.
Yeah, that's a very good question, but you know, the whole thing about this is you've got to be pragmatic and reasonable. Now I'm not saying no plane should ever photograph any area and so on, but what Google have done, they've taken it that much further, and they just photograph in massive detail what people are doing. If you're having a barbecue, that can go on Google. Now, fine if you want it, but if they're going to do that level of detail, very big, very different from an aerial view of a particular area, then you should be asking permission to have it done in the first place.
So the gentleman here, then the gentleman here.
Can I just change the topic slightly and ask, have you seen anything that leads you to believe that Google deliberately recorded and stored packets of information from people's wireless connections?
No, but of course not. But the fact is they've done it. So whether they, as I said in my speech, whether they did it deliberately or not, it is pretty. I actually think it's quite unbelievable that millions of people's personal Wi-Fi were mapped without any permission.
I know that Simon will be wanting to say something about that later too.
But what do you make of Eric Schmidt's comment that nobody who's harmed, so why does it matter?
Because we don't. First of all, we don't. You may no one's harmed at the moment, but we can say that about a lot of civil liberties. You know, we just got rid or part of police stop and search powers. Some people have been on. I was done on stop and search, but I felt a great objection to it because once you go down this path, you create a pendulum shift in which the freedoms and every time you curtail individual liberty, it's that much easier to curtail it next time, and that is what Google have done.
The gentleman
are doing.
I think Rob kind of almost touched on the issue when he said that Google have gone, and I quote, that much further. I think that one of the problems with this is that there are lots of things that are taking place that are not qualitatively different from one another, but that are shades of grey. And I think that with lawyers in the room, one of lawyers' favourite words is reasonable. What is it that makes, Google one side of reasonableness, but other people that maybe just taking isolated photos, the other side of reasonable? How is it that we would begin to formulate a law that actually, or at least formulate a legal framework that allowed us to arrive at a sensible definition of what is reasonable?
Well, exactly what you said, you need lawyers to do this, but this is why I say there needs to be a debate, a public debate about this, both in Parliament and outside. And we need to have some kind of framework whereby internet companies can't just go and do this and infringe on your personal privacy. I mean, look at, as I mentioned, the example of BT and Facebook, going through your Facebook account. There has to be some kind of code, some kind of contract with internet companies and the public, so that the public can be reassured.
We'll take one.
And that, I'm not qualified to write the legislation now.
We'll take one more question from Rob, and then we'll go back to science. The gentleman in the corner.
I wonder if a part of this is about us realising that we need to be more grown up about the internet. So we need to realise that writing something on Facebook is a public space. Isn't there an element of the public needing to? This debate is as much about education as it is about anything else. Because BT can't log into my Facebook account, but if I make it public, they can see it. That, to me, if I shout something in the street, they can listen to it and they can respond. If I write it in public, same deal.
Well, but no, as I understand it, B2 actually trawling people's private Facebook accounts that they have, because, I mean, just as you have a private Facebook account and you can have adverts that come to you, for example, I collect watches, I love watches, so of course watch adverts come through. The same thing was probably being done by BT, I'm guessing, in the thing. So, and I don't agree. I think if you open a Facebook account that is private, and I happen to use Facebook, I love all this sort of thing, then it should be up to me to decide who goes on it. You know, who is surveying me. If I want I think I have to go. It should be up to me to decide who starts trawling through my thing, who goes through my garden, who looks at my Wi-Fi. Yeah. I've actually got a problem with Google going on my Wi-Fi, but they've done this without our permission, and this is the key thing. That they are doing all this because they've grown so big and almost too successful that they ride over, in my view, the rights of the individual, despite having great products to offer.
Rob, can I say it's great to see the new era of freedom for MPs applying to you guys in every facet of your life. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you very much.